this project, this is all part and parcel of, has to do with the restoration of the source footage, from the earliest tapes from World's Largest TV Studio, 4 More Years, and Gerald Ford's America.
Right.
So about almost 450 tapes were transferred.
Holy shit. Wow.
And so that is being collated and collected and looked through. There is new writing being committed right now, and that'll all go online. Rick Perlinger is writing, if you know of him. Deidre Boyle is writing some more.
Oh, yeah. Cool.
I'm writing. I've already written my piece. Brian Fry. So there'll be different avenues, people with different disciplines, kind of looking at that work, and then the interviews will be kind of located in proximity to all that, along with paper ephemera. Because years back, Alan also gave us all the scrapbooks and things of that sort. So they're all digitized, and they're going to emerge quite soon. Some of it actually is already accessible, I believe.
Cool.
And I can send you a link for that.
And then can I be buried up there too?
That you can. We have urns.
Yeah, I was going to say. That was nice, just to make it easy.
So in talking with Megan and Alan, we basically began at the very beginning and only talked through the first couple of works. We didn't try to extend this discussion out into the move to Los Angeles or the creation of things like the Super Bowl or the Academy Awards docs. It was really just looking at that first 2.5 years or so.
Right.
So I thought we could begin there and think about what you were conceiving of that would be called TVTV when you were kind of in the middle of guerrilla television, radical software, that period. If all of that writing, all the publications, what was coming out of Raindance created this need to have a more practical application, or if it was something else that was being created.
For me, the genesis was because I had trained as a journalist, first as a police reporter in Chicago, then I was working at Time Life in New York, where I actually met Frank Gillette, who was living with a girl I'd gone to college with, and he and Paul Ryan and Irish Snyder were the first people doing the experimental video work, and then I would take it on the street and just shoot sort of more, I had more documentary kind of orientation. And actually, I told this story to Rucker the other day. So I'm working out at the YMCA on, I think, 23rd Street, and I had this clear epiphany. I wanted to start a company, and I had TVTV, Top Value Television, popped into my head, and the substance of it was, well, why don't we go to mainstream events and do an alternative point of view? Because I knew how to do journalism from having been a journalist. So the genesis of it was essentially to do a demo of, could we take what we were doing and show people how you could change the media by doing the events they know about a much different way. And that was the genesis of TVTV. So there was a deliberate plan to like do a proof of concept, as it were.
Yeah, because at one point I was trying to argue in my writing, but I was proved wrong by Alan and Megan that there was a clear line between, say, radical software and then the writing of guerrilla television and then the creation of TVTV, as though it was the proof of the publications in a sense. Whereas Megan...
I'm sorry, I will. I actually think it was. I think to the degree it was sort of kind of a young manifesto about radicalizing the media, or at least not radicalizing as much as opening up the media to other voices and other eyes. If we hadn't had that kind of, philosophical underpinning when I'm sitting around thinking of what to do next, I never would have thought of this. So I just respectfully disagree with them.
Oh, okay. Because what they were saying, in a sense, is you were stripping away some of the more hippie-like aspects, and that it was an approach that in a certain way wanted to alter television, but remain within a kind of commercial realm at the same time. You wanted the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I mean, why not? I think we all want to make a living at it. But it wasn't so much the best of both worlds. It was like you weren't going to take the conventional world and pull it into a different point of view and abandon itself. You're only going to take the conventional point of view and in an additive way show an expanded cinema grammar of what you can do.
So before you had even left New York, the decision was made that it would be the conventions.
Honestly, Rutgers seems to have a better memory than I do on that. I'm pretty sure at the same time I thought of the name TVTV, I instantly thought of doing the conventions as the proof of concept. So I probably put the two together.
Mm-hmm. And was there a specific reason why you pulled up stakes in New York and headed for San Francisco?
You know, I sort of like well, Alan was out there, and it's San Francisco. It just seemed like time for a change. I also remember the media establishment was there, and Alan had started whatever his group was. He was
the Media Access Center,
a whole Earth catalog. So there was clearly a culture of innovation in the San Francisco area, which obviously continues to this day with Silicon.
And of course, Ant Farm was already.
The Ant Farm guys were there.
And some other groups were starting to percolate to the surface. I don't know if you remember Video Free America, with Skip Sweeney, Optic Nerve.
I remember Optic Nerve. I can't remember who it was, though.
Yeah, Optic Nerve was Jim Mayer and John Rogers and Jules Backus and Lynn Adler.
You know, it's what I call technological determinism. Anybody with the equipment would have both, it's like, an infinite amount of monkeys, an infinite amount of typewriters. Anybody with the equipment was going to figure out where to go. It's like the internet writ small. You know, if you look at the internet, every nook and cranny of the internet has been filled or will be filled with some sort of innovation, particularly including YouTube and videos and now TikTok. So we just had the equipment first. We were of a generation was looking, oppositionally to the mainstream culture, and we had a skill set. So it was a confluence of elements. And if we hadn't done it, somebody else would have. In retrospect, I always thought, why didn't I think of YouTube? So that was,
yeah, right. Yeah. And how did Tom Weinberg come into this?
Alan asked me that the other day, and I had no recollection of how we hooked up with him. So I just can't tell you that. He'll probably remember though.
Okay, I'll ask him then. So you get the house in Miami, right, and then you start recruiting in all these teams, and I think you accumulated 28 people altogether. Was there a criteria that you set down for who was going to be accepted into this little world? And
I think it was pretty much anybody we invited who wanted to come. Remember, we knew the video freaks from New York, and they were very key components of coming down there. And then we knew the Ant Farm, and they were key components. It's kind of people we knew who wanted to sign on to this sort of adventure. And, at that point in time, everybody said, I'm in. I can't remember anybody who didn't want to come. But, I do have to do a shout out to a filmmaker, a guy named Stanton Kay, who I met through Irish Schneider. And Stanton was he did a short called Georg, which got him money from the AFI to do another film called In Pursuit of Treasure. And then he ended up in software. I don't even know if he's still alive, but he was a very gracious guy. When we had the footage from the first convention, the Democratic convention in Miami, he stepped in and gave us really, really kind of professional advice on how to cut it. He wasn't the catalyst for it, but he was very generous with his time. I have no idea what happened to him. I'll probably Google him after this interview.
Yeah. So he was in New York. He wasn't in Miami. He was participating in the edit.
Yeah, he was participating in the edit. can't remember if he came down. He might have come down, but I can't remember, to be honest.
Mm. And another thing is that with the money you raised, I think there was an obligation at some level to get the documentaries cut relatively quickly, within a couple of weeks of the conclusion of each convention.
Well, I remember cutting it quickly simply because there was a timeliness to it. I don't know whether the people who are generous enough to back us had put any sort of delivery date on it, but we're there. This thing just happened. Let's get it done. What are we going to do? We're going to go back and cut it. And so that was just what we were going to do.
Mm-hmm. No, it's just that I know that, for instance, in some of the conversations you have in the source footage, you are sometimes questioning whether you're actually going to pull it off or not, because there's so much herding of these disparate personalities that whether it's going to coalesce into a finished work.
I never worried about the meshing of personalities. I remember I had a big sketch pad. These were long before the internet, long before laptops. And I every day we'd look at the calendar of events, which they would announce. And then I would go, well, okay, the Young Republicans or the Democratic Tea or the whatever, and you'd write it down. And so you'd have this event, this event, this event. And then you'd look around and figure out who the crew would be to go cover it, okay? And then you'd send them out, and then they'd come back and you'd debrief them. So it was a pretty organized approach, okay? Now, the fact that it was an organized approach to assembling footage is different from an organized approach to, actually editing it. And then the editing, look, the whole genius of the thing was that you could shoot 100 to 1, and you could never shoot even Super 8 100 to 1. You'd have to process it. You'd have to edge number it. You'd have to do all this stuff. So if you're shooting 100 to 1, literally 100 hours for 1 hour, okay, it's not hard to find really dramatic footage. And also the secret to that is the word fan comes from fanatic. And anybody who goes to an event, like a sporting event or a convention or some sort of, professional convention, they're not there to operate on a completely integrated personality. They're there to operate on the motive that got them there and the bubble of talking about why they're there. So particularly in larger-than-life events, you get extreme behavior, okay? And then within that extreme behavior, if you shoot 100 to 1, it's like shooting fish in a rain barrel. So then what you do is you get all the footage that's great, okay? And then you figure out how do you support that footage with some sort of through line. And then you go back and you look for interstitial stuff that will tell the story. And because we didn't want to do voiceover, we would use people talking as voiceover, but we were never going to have a narrator. And then you sort of have to figure, all right, there's a gap here. What piece of footage explains it somehow? Okay. And I read once that George Lucas said, you put a movie together, you see what works, and you figure out what to do with the rest of it. So if you if you work out of the footage, you can sort of piece it together, that's what we did. Mm-hmm. Now it wasn't necessarily a chronology. Have you seen this documentary on Apple, Boys State? It's called Boys State. Yeah, Boys State. It's about this convention they have in Texas every year.
That just came out.
Yeah, it's very chronological, and I'm having a little trouble sticking with it, okay, because it doesn't start with personalities with Amit who's sitting across from me, so it kind of ends up more personality-based. But, the chronology of the convention was a little bit secondary to, you needed the nomination and the balloons falling is a good climax to some degree, but the chronology of the convention wasn't necessarily the most revealing way to do the convention. I haven't seen the documentaries in a long time, so I honestly don't remember how they were structured.
And I was going to ask you about that. The two documentaries seem to be reflections of not only growing skill and a growing and maturing attitude about the medium, but the events themselves went from anarchic to completely choreographed.
Okay. Well,
So
I'm sorry. Go finish the question. I'm sorry.
So in the Democratic convention, there seems to be a lot of flailing around by the video makers, which fit perfectly into the kind of anarchic character of all of the infighting that was going on at the convention. And then they get to the Republican convention and seem to have a stronger sense of how to use the camera, what's important. And they also discover an event that has been scripted minute by minute by minute.
Well, yeah, I think that's a good insight. The Republican convention, first of all, Nixon was already, he's being nominated again. They had their narrative figured out, but the Democrats in the McGovern narrative hadn't quite had their narrative figured out. And so they didn't quite know what they were presenting. So I do think there's I think that's a good insight. It's reflective of the choreography of the event, the Republican convention being better choreographed than the Democratic convention. But also I think we did learn from that, what events to go to, and then probably how to shoot a little bit better, and probably who could shoot better than other people. Not everybody with a video camera knows how to shoot.
Yeah. Yeah, there is,
sure
and when you look at the source footage, there are, especially in the earlier days of the collective, there are long passages that go nowhere. Someone starts moving through a crowd as though there is an endpoint that they're directing themselves towards, and there's just nothing at the other end.
Well, Paul Goldsmith, a great documentary cameraman who became our partner, he said something that always stuck with me. He said, never leave a shot and use the camera to search for the next shot. You have to, with one eye, be shooting, and with the other eye, figure out where you want the camera to go. And I don't think most people do that. So if I shoot, but I'll tell you a very funny story. So my daughter's now 24, but she went to a private school here with one of Steven Spielberg's daughters, and in the elementary school graduation, they did it alphabetically, so it goes like Shamberg, Spielberg. So Steven Spielberg's daughter and my daughter are coming towards the camera, and I'm in the aisle next to Spielberg, who I don't really know, and I'm shooting it, and he's shooting it, and I look at the viewfinder on his camera, and I said, boy, this guy really knows how to shoot, okay? So you can learn it, or you can have it intuitively. And people just didn't understand it. They're just good camera people and bad camera people. The bad camera people. And there's nothing more frustrating than editing a documentary and you're yelling at the screen, no, pan left, you want to be over there.
There actually are some very funny moments in the rough footage where you're saying, they're just going to go to the Doral Hotel, go into the lobby, shoot some old farts, the light will be terrible. And then...
Also, you also have, I don't know if you ever saw the thing we did of Spielberg in the Oscars where he's not getting nominated for Jaws. Have you ever seen that footage?
No, I've never seen it.
Spielberg plus Jaws, plus nomination. You'll see it. Somebody uploaded it to YouTube, and he thinks he's going to be nominated for directing Jaws, and while the movie was directed, he was not. And we were in his office, and he was very gracious. He's a really cool, gracious, classy guy. But you could never do that now, okay? You can never get away with just hanging out with celebrities or anybody and just do it. And now everybody knows what a camera is on. It hasn't stopped a lot of Karens from being idiotic on camera. Every day you see more. But the relationship between the camera and the subject has really changed now. So people are hyper aware so that they can perform for camera. In the case of TikTok videos, which I always enjoy, they're performing and editing. And so it didn't distort behavior back then the way it distorts behavior now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's rare that there is anything where people are acting out for the camera.
Well, they are. Every reality show, every Kardashian
back
show.
In '72,
Yeah, reality TV is all about people acting out for the camera, in front of the camera, forgetting the camera. Working on a reality show now with some people who are very successful and learning their techniques. people know they're performing for camera, and you cast people who can perform themselves on camera. And that's what all these successful reality shows are.
Yeah, yeah. But I think that was an instinct that hadn't quite been learned
back then
in the early 70s.
Nobody knew that.
I mean, there certainly was in the early days of the Portapack, people being quite taken by the fact that they could see themselves on television.
Yeah, and we play it back for people.
In a personal context.
And we play it back for people, and they're really fascinated by that.
Yeah, yeah. One of the other things that comes out in the footage is there's quite a bit of footage around people who are notable now and don't really make it into the final documentaries.
Oh.
One of those, well, there's a nice short interview with John Lewis.
Oh, really?
By Maureen Orth.
Really? Boy, I'd love to see that. If you could send it to me, I'll send it to...
I could send you a link for it.
Would you send me a link? I'll send it to Maureen because we're still good friends and working
No, we've
together.
already sent it to Maureen.
You did? Oh, okay. Did she comment on it?
Yeah, she was really pleased to see it.
Really I'd like to see it too, but you should really interview Maureen because she was plucked from conventional journalism, and she was sort of the front woman who could kind of look respectable and ask questions and stuff. So, and she'll have a great perspective on it. She's terrific. We're still very good.
Yeah, she had a nice presence. Yeah. You know, the favorite discovery for me though was at a party at the Republican convention, but it was kind of a counter party, and Ed Sanders and Allen Ginsberg are there.
Oh, funny! I vaguely remember that.
And Ed Sanders, there's a sequence where an old guy puts on an Al Jolson record, and then to the assembled party lip syncs an Al Jolson song. As soon as his song is over, Sanders comes up, sits down on a bar stool with an auto harp and starts singing the semi-obscene song about, Nixon is murdering people, and the camera would pan to the audience and they were completely dumbfounded. And so I'm going to try to get that footage to Sanders. He might get a kick out of it. But there's quite a bit of stuff like that. A lot of Ron Kovic, of course.
Yeah, which was then literally duplicated in
Born on the 4th of July. Yeah. And just some extended interviews with a lot of feminists, who were at the Democratic convention.
Look, I remember when we actually edited in New York at the C.T. Louis, the guy who sold us the equipment downtown and what is now Tribeca. And I remember when we were editing, the word had gotten out and this group of them came by. I know Bill Abzug came by to look at stuff. I can't remember if Gloria Steinem was there and somebody else. So, and I would hope that Megan supports this and that I think women were just always treated equally. There was never any sexism at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the women at the Democratic convention got great coverage. Yeah. There wasn't the equivalent at the Republican side because the women were basically tamped down.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful quote where it might have been Maureen goes up to Tricia Nixon and says, "What do you think of the Vietnam veterans out in the streets?" Yeah. And she said, "I think it's braver to believe in something that's positive."
Yeah. Yeah, I remember the Tricia Nixon. Yeah.
And I thought that was impressive.
She was a non-malignant Ivanka Trump, I guess.
Yeah, but you can definitely see the arc drawn from Tricia to Ivanka. It's even a similar aesthetic of this kind of plasticized appearance. After the two documentaries were completed and then shown on cable, I'm told that a third version was created, a 90-minute combination of the two longer works?
I never seen. You mean like Godfather 1 and 2 being edited together? I'm completely unaware of that.
And shown on Westinghouse, on the
Oh,
Westinghouse
that's right. Well,
system.
we sold it. There's a really great guy. I'm sure he's long deceased, named Joel Chaseman, who was president of Westinghouse Broadcasting, and he bought it, which was a real coup. That's when we got the national publicity, thanks to this really wonderful guy. And then, but I think they weren't intercut. I think they were back to back, and we probably did cut it down. That I do remember, because they had in those days, transferring a half-inch tape to like broadcast quality tape was a big deal technically.
Yeah. So you had to bump it up to 2-inch, which I guess you had never had to do when you were just doing cable.
At WNET, John Godfrey, who really figured out how to do it.
And then you eventually teamed up with his people for a while.
Well, yeah, David Loxton ran the TV lab, gave us a deal to do like 5 documentaries. But that was after after we had done, I think, the Lord of the Universe.
Yeah, Lord of the Universe, exactly. And after the second work was completed, there was a small hiatus before you did Lord of the Universe, and I guess Alan went off to do Adland.
Well, Adland was still a TV production. Alan was more centrally involved in it. That was the one we did in between.
But as a result of the thinking around the first 2 docs, were you determined that TVTV would now be a going concern?
Well, there look, back in those days, you weren't really thinking of monetizing it or going concern, or there were no houses where TikTok influencers all gathered to make money. But we knew we'd found a form that we wanted to pursue, so that required subject matters, which required thinking of what we wanted to do next. And arguably, if it hadn't been for David Loxton and WNET, I don't know what would have happened to the group, but. As a result, we turned out more work. Some of the Gerald Ford's America stuff, some of it's really good. The Oscars documentary holds up great, if you ask me.
Oh, another sequence that I should send you a link to that was just discovered is from Gerald Ford's America. It's Skip Lumberg and Andy Mann. And they are, I think, in front of the Capitol, and they each have a porta-pack, and they're aiming the cameras at each other and going in a circle. And it's been mounted as like a 2-channel piece, so you can see the interchange. I'll send you the link for that.
Skip has a good sense of playfulness. Sadly, Andy died young. I can't remember what of.
Yeah. He died in his early 50s, I believe. Yeah. But I've sent it to Skip already. Cool. He was pleased. The other thing that's, there is, especially in the first couple of days when you were in Miami, there is a lot of discussion between you, Megan, Alan, often Hudson would get involved, and Tom, talking about how we are going to wrangle this rolling thunder, because I think there were, Ira had shown up, and he at some point said,
Dylan thing?
No. The idea that there was so much chaos in the first week or so, and there is considerable time spent just letting the camera roll while you're sitting around the house talking about what is this thing we're doing. Because I know at one point Ira volunteers to stop going out in the field, and he'll just deal with the inventory of equipment because there's no one even making sure the batteries are charged. And there's a little bit of a battle between you and Alan and Megan about what constitutes leadership.
I have no recollection of it, but it was a good social experiment.
But it was interesting and lively. In a certain way, what you do with the reporter from Newsweek at the swimming pool, becomes kind of a reduction of hours and hours and hours of already.
I forgot. I vaguely remember. What did we do with Reporter from Newsweek?
Well, just, you're sitting by the pool and you are finally trying to, you've introduced Ira and Tom and everybody is including their specific role that they might acquire or have assumed. And then you're telling her what you're trying to do that's different. And so it becomes kind of the capsulization of what you've been mulling over for hours around the house in Miami. And that I thought was rather interesting. In a certain way, you're trying to create structure on the move.
Well, yeah, and we have to remember, first of all, documentaries tend to, well, it depends on your style, but structure of documentaries often comes after you've shot the footage. Not all documentaries, but so you then had to structure the management system to even get the footage, and nobody ever had a production modus operandi like this. So at the same time you're inventing the form, you're inventing the management structure of it as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, in a certain way, when you look at the source footage, you can see that there are also other documentaries inside this world of what's been shot. One of the preoccupations of a lot of the footage was the complexity of what the networks were doing. So there are a lot of encounters with other camera crews where you're kind of comparing notes about their vast and overwhelming hardware versus yours. Yeah. You go to some of these control rooms where they have flow charts.
Yeah.
You talk to some of the anchors.
Well, there's a great montage of Skip talking to Roger Mudd and all those, and playing the harmonica and all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But I was wondering if a lot of that footage is rather interesting, but it would probably not necessarily be of interest to just a general audience, like the internal makings of television.
I don't know how interesting that would be. Look, now the conventions are only on television; they're not even live. So,
or now they're just on Zoom. Yeah. We are a convention.
Yeah, exactly. And yet, just for this morning, 28 million people combined on streaming and the networks watched the convention last night. That's a big audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, but I was just thinking, was your curiosity about the internal makings evident because you were so distinctly different than that?
Yeah, of course. Part of it was there's a great shot. It may be in Guerrilla television or maybe post Guerrilla television of one of our guys with a porta-pack standing next to one of their guys with those big portable units. It was. We enjoyed the contrast of how nimble we were with our equipment, not much less our thinking compared to theirs. So every time we sort of looked at them, there was sort of a subtext of irony, which is, oh, you need all this to make a documentary, and we can do this without all that.
Yeah, and there was actually some jealousy on their part.
Yeah.
Because I think what they were doing was rather backbreaking.
Yeah, that stuff was hard. That was hard work carrying that stuff around.
Yeah, there is some great footage of Skip Blumberg interacting with other people, just out in the aisles.
Yeah.
But it's almost as though you could go back to this footage and resurrect another couple of works.
Yeah, if
not that
somebody
you
has
want
the time to do it, but.
Yeah. I mean, we're going to do a program where 4 more years will be shown, and there'll be some conversation around it and some outtakes shown.
Oh, that's cool. I look forward to that.
So, and that'll be more public, so that some of these areas that don't make it into the final works can actually
That's
be
cool.
addressed. Yeah. There's another wonderful moment. Well, there are a number where with the Republican convention, it was very much a kind of controlled environment inside the convention, but outside the convention hall, where the delegates still had to go to get to their hotels and whatever, they came face to face with the chaos of the Vietnam vets and the tear gassing. And there's footage of Republican delegates rushing into the hall, having just gone through a tear gassing themselves and wanting revenge.
Well, there's
basically.
the interview that's in the final version where that young guy says, "Look, I'm not saying what happened at Kent State should happen here, but..."
Yeah. But there are several moments when that was captured, and it almost seems like it's where the leakage of the outside world, which you can't control,
exactly,
finds itself seeping through the doors of the convention hall. Yeah. And so, what was it 74 that you pulled up stakes and moved down to Los Angeles?
We moved to LA, I'm pretty sure, in 70. Well, let's see. It must have been 74 because, let's see, the Oscars, we were living in LA and we did the Oscars documentary, and I think that was 75. Mm-hmm. So we must have moved in 74. I always thought I moved in 75. But it may have been but it may have been 74.
Yeah. But that at some level left behind some influencing elements, like leaving behind Ant Farm and some of those other collaborators. And you had a slightly more distinct group that you were working with by the time. When Paul Goldsmith came in.
Very influential. Yeah, we rented a house on Robertson Boulevard here, and we were all working out of this great little house.
And I guess Elon Soltis was there, Wendy Apple, perhaps. But a much more contained and predictable group.
Yeah. It was essentially a company, albeit nonprofit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess unless you have some anecdotal things you'd like to share.
It was a wonderful experience of kind of breaking new ground, doing stuff that was interesting, doing stuff that had its peak scope to it, meaning you're getting people to see it. And, I think it was a good challenge for people to kind of go into the world and make our own way. I think we sort of grew up as a generation that was distrustful of institutions, so we sort of thought we'd make our own. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of thematic, psychological, it was a culmination of a lot of stuff, and it was also the beginning of a lot of stuff that I think influenced everybody afterwards. So, it's all in all, it was a wonderful experience. It was never something you could monetize the way we were doing it, and we kind of weren't thinking that way. So we finally just sort of broke up. But it was great. That's all I.
Well, you went on to do a few things.
Yeah, I just got. The story is this. I realized it was this easy to raise $50,000 for documentaries, $5 million or more for a feature. And I had an idea for this film, which became Heartbeat, because I just wanted to get into the movie business or give it a try. So I was just kind of lucky at that point in time. But there's in a lot of some of my best films, there's a real journalistic edge to them. Say Erin Brockovich or Contagion. I think I've done 9 true stories. But also the other theme of my career has been innovation. Who can you find who wants? And this is probably the key to what we were doing. We wanted to innovate in the mainstream. Okay, we weren't interested in in just being off to the side. So if you look at The Big Chill, or Reality Bites, or those films, or being lucky enough to work with Tarantino, it was always the ethos of let's innovate in the mainstream. Let's find what's next in the mainstream instead of copying the mainstream. It's a little bit more diffuse now because the mainstream is pretty much just comic book movies, which I like, and documentaries are really having a heyday now. I mean, documentaries are great. They're as entertaining as features now.
Yeah.
In fact, my wife and I are producing a documentary series for Netflix about whistleblowers, and and I think the future of features is really interesting now. My friend Ben Smith wrote a column in the New York Times yesterday about Hollywood system is kind of over, and who knows when people start going back to theaters. So, which doesn't mean obviously there'll be no movies, and Netflix has sort of swooped in and making multiplex movies now, that kind of programmer movies. So it's going to be really interesting to see who sort of breaks out. I'm waiting for some kid from TikTok in 4 or 5 years to make a really cool feature.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of good change now.
Another thing that you did a lot of early on was publishing. You wrote up a storm for a while.
We were doing Radical Software, which is just a...
And then, even Primetime Survey.
Oh, yeah, the Primetime thing was fun. It still holds up, too. It's got some really cool ideas. Yeah, well, part of that was the influence of the Ant Farm, because they could do those great graphics. And part of it was a way to write these kind of mini manifestos and get our ideas out in writing.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a rich moment. So.
Yeah, and, these rich moments continue. I mean, it's really... we're in a time of really great change, which is always positive, and then there's also the negative, because you now are faced with a tsunami of misinformation. What Trump calls fake news is actually hard as facts, and then what he says is actually fake facts. So it's a little bit like 1984 there.
Yeah.
And that has to do just basically with everybody having their own camera. Remember, there's 3 aspects to producing your own stuff. We only had 1 and a half. Okay, the one was shooting, the second was editing, and the third was distribution. Okay.
Yeah.
So shooting, editing, obviously, since Final Cut and all that stuff, is anybody can do it on a laptop, and then the internet gives you distribution. So. The disintermediation is a phrase that John Landgraf, who used to be my partner, uses about you don't need these institutions to produce content anymore. You can go direct to consumer. And I was reading today about some YouTube influencer just bought a $10 million house, or some TikTok influencer who makes $5 million a year. So the impetus towards democratization is very strong now, but it's also created this miasm of false information.
Yeah. And I come out of a world that has its feet stuck in the past, because I come out of the archival world.
Yeah. But here's the thing about archival. Archival is the source of a lot of good documentaries. Like the thing we're doing about whistleblowers is based on an incident of 30 years ago, where there's a lot of archival footage. Wild Wild Country on Netflix was a lot of archival footage. So the archives are very rich now in terms of coming alive again. Archive. And the first thing you do when you start a doc is you hire somebody to do research the archives. So. It's just a week or two ago, Megan called with an immediate need to get a section out of the Rolling Stone doc that someone was buying. Oh, really? Some rough footage. Oh, well, I know some of it was supposed to have been in a documentary about Jan Wenner that Alex Gibney did, but I never saw it. I think Rucker saw it too. Yeah, I'm trying to think of. Because we had a request once before, for Hunter Thompson footage. Yeah. And I'm trying to think of what they wanted this time. Yeah, there was a thing, boy, I could never get it. I was gonna take Hunter to South Africa and have him do a running commentary about Apathy, and I couldn't get WNET to go for it. But I flew to Colorado. I had dinner at Hunter's house. He drove me back to the airport, like one hand on the wheel, another hand on a glass of scotch. And I regret that we never got that going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's quite amazing in that footage you have. He's about to drive to Los Angeles along Highway 1, and he pops a few uppers for the trip on camera. But the best moment is Al Green.
What was the Al Green moment? I just remember being stoned listening to Al Green, but I wasn't recording it.
Yeah, Al Green's in the offices, and one of you guys asks him for the time, and he bears this enormous watch, and he's working, and he says, I always have trouble telling what time it is because I'm always on Memphis time.
I remember that.
Well, I should leave it there.
Yeah, no, this was fun. I appreciate your interest, really, and anything you need, let me know.
Yeah, and I'll send you the links to the John Lewis and a couple other things, because I think you'll appreciate them.
Yeah, the John Lewis thing, I'm really pleased. I'd completely forgotten. I'm glad you sent it to Maureen, too.
Yeah. Well, I contacted her fairly early on about research.
Thanks a lot. I'll send this stuff back to you, and if you need anything else, obviously, don't hesitate to ask. And thanks for your patience for me getting this set up.
Oh, I'm sorry that it's actually is a lot more complex.
They could have done it okay, but I just didn't have the patience for it. Whereas Amit is really good at this stuff. So, but it's a good system, and if you send me the raw footage of this when you have a chance, so I have it for my records.
Okay,
cool. Thanks again.
You got it.
Bye.
Good.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.